This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. My goal today is to show you how to knit a hat using the pile knitting technique that I have taught in a couple of previous videos. This hat is a woman's slouchy hat. It is big and warm. Pile knitting is very warm. It's a little subject to snagging, and I thought a hat would be practical. I have doubled the ribbing. This is a relatively thin yarn because I'm doing it on a bulky machine using full needle rib. The yarn I'm using today is this off-white, and it is a brushed acrylic, and it's Feeling Gradient from Hobby Lobby. So a good choice for this because it will give us lots and lots of fluffy little loops like my green hat. So let's get started. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the ribbing because I want to get into the pile, but I do have lots of other lessons about ribbing. Anyway, I'm going to thread the machine and do a zigzag row with this yarn over 1 by 1 ribbing, needle number left 41 to needle number right 40 on the main bed. Then the ribber is on 3P as in plain, and it runs from needle 40 on the left to needle 38 on the right. And I'm doing the zigzag row. After the zigzag row, hanging the comb and 2 heavy weights, I am going to do 3 circular rows on tension 0. Since the ribbing is doubled, the cuff is double thickness, I folded it to the inside and tacked it all the way around because I wanted that extra warmth. I'm going to do 24 rows of ribbing. So I switch my machine over to plain ribbing and tension 1. I put my row counter on 0, 0, 0. And I do my 24 rows. I'll do that and be right back. After 24 rows of ribbing, I need to transfer every stitch that is on the ribber up to the main bed. And I'm just going to do that with a double-eyed tool. So I will do that right on across and come back on camera when that little job is done. Now that all the stitches are on the main bed, I want to set the carriages for pile knitting. I'm going to tension 2 on both carriages. On the ribber carriage, I'm setting this carriage to slip when it's going to the right, so I'm putting this right slip lever up. Both carriages are set to knit needles that are in hold. So I have this lever on each side of the ribber up. I have the slide lever over to the left. Then on the main bed I have this NH lever to the left. I also, and this is very important, have the left tuck button pushed in. With the left tuck button pushed in, the main carriage tucks to the left and knits to the right. With the right part lever pushed up on the ribber, it's going to knit to the left and slip to the right. So now I'm all set for that. I put my row counter on 0, 0, 0 because the loopy stripes are done in groups of 20. Now, to accomplish pile knitting, I have several things to do for each group of 2 rows. But before I can even do that, I need the needle arrangement. I need to put all the needles on the ribber into work, move the ribber, not all the needles, but the needles I need, move the ribber to 3H, and what I'm going to do is bring both of the end main bed needles out to hold. The first row to the left, which is knitting to the left, is going to do tuck stitches, and I don't want to tuck the end stitches, so I pull those out and that'll work fine for me. Now I knit to the left, and I get something like this. These stitches are zigzagging between the beds, and that is how it's going to look. Now when I knit to the right, the main bed will knit off and nothing happens on the ribber. It just slips. So there I have my first pair of rows. I'm on row counter 2 of pile knitting, but I am not finished. Some people do pile knitting where they drop the loops later, and I hate that. I don't think you'll like it either. It is so much work to pick all the loops out. What I do instead is use the carriage to drop the loops. And I push this button and it unhooks the ribber carriage from the main carriage. Now this is an empty carriage, and when I go to the left, it drops all of those loops. Those loops are just loose in there. And then when I go back to the right, I go all the way to the coupler and snap it back in. Now I have another step. I take a cut credit card. You could use a transfer tool, you could use a needle pusher, but the cut credit card is ideal. And I slide along and put all those loops between the bed. With those loops between the bed, they're not going to give me any trouble or get caught on anything. And that completes my first group of loops. I am going to do 16 rows of that. So here I go again, and that's going to be for my first stripe. I've brought out my end needles on both ends. I know you can't see both ends, but I didn't want to zoom so far out that you couldn't see much. And then I knit across and back. Uncouple the ribber carriage and go across and back, and then take my cut credit card and just slide those loops between the beds where they're not a problem for me. And I repeat this until my row counter says 16, which will be 8 rows of pile loops. I'll be back when I have that done. Here I am doing those last 2 rows. There's one caution I have for you, and that is do not let your hands interfere with the yarn coming out of the coupler. You can knock it out of the coupler. So that's the one thing I'm a little bit careful about. And having done my 16 rows and pushed all my little loops between the beds, now I'm going to do 4 rows plain. I'm on row counter 16. 4 rows plain is going to put me on row counter 20. So to do 4 rows plain, lift your ribber carriage left P button up. So the left and right buttons are up. This middle lever stays in R. And then on your main carriage, cancel the tuck. This is for the 4 rows only. You knit 4 rows. And then you have to switch back to pile knitting. So this goes back down so that only the right side of the ribber slips, and then that left tuck button goes back in. Now I'm going to do a total of 80 rows, 4 of the pile knitting stripes. On my hat you see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these 20 row stripes. So I'm going to do that and then I'll be back. I have just finished row 36, and I just wanted to point out that these are 20 row groups. There's 16 rows of loops and 4 rows of plain knitting. So for this group, for instance, when my row counter's at 20, I started doing loops, and when my row counter says 36, I start doing the plain rows. Then when I have row 40 on, I start loops again. When I have row 56 on the counter, plain rows again. When I have row 60 on the counter, loops again, row 76 on the counter, plain rows again. I do 4 plain rows, and that puts me on row counter 80. I've just knitted row 76, so I have to do 4 rows of plain. Now you might be wondering why it is that the ribber coupler is able to successfully knit the 4 rows each time. Well, it's because there's a lot of weight. Now that I've done my 80 rows, I don't need to do anything else with the ribber. I'm going to do the rest with the regular fabric presser, the regular sinker plate. So I'm putting covers on my ribber. I'm taking almost all the weight off. Now I needed some weight on the ends of the work, and I used triangle weight hangers. The edge weight hangers that are just a piece of wire don't work because you're always dropping the loops off the ribber, so there's nothing to hold them up. So you need these kind of a claw weight hanger on the ends. I have the regular sinker plate on. I'm rolling the tension down to 1 and a click, 1.1. And now I'm going to transfer every 4th stitch to the needle beside it. And I'm going to take the empty needle and push it back out of work. And I'm doing that all the way across the work. That means that there will be less stitches in work, and this is the first step toward narrowing the crown of the hat. So I'll get these transfers done and be right back. All the way across the needle bed, I have 3 stitches and then an empty needle. 3 empty, 3 empty. On the rightmost of each group, I have 2 loops where I did the decrease. And I've turned my tension down to 1.1. I'm going to do 4 rows like that. Now I'm going to reduce the number of needles again. I'm going to take each of these center stitches and move it to the needle next to it and put the empty needle back out of work. That'll put me on every other needle the entire width of the work. And that'll get my crown of my hat a little tighter. I don't like a bunchy gathered crown, but for this one, where it doesn't show very much how I did the decreases, I didn't bother doing my usual garter bar job. This is a quick, easy way to shape the crown. So I'll get all these transfers done all the way across. I'll double check that all the empty needles are back out of work, and then I'll be back. Now I knit a row to the left. When I get to the left, I'm going to tighten my tension dial by 1 click. That'll get me from 1 plus 1 dot down to 1. On the left-hand end, which I know is off camera and you can't see, I tightened it again, so now I'm at 1 click smaller than tension 1. And then here on the right, I tighten it again, and 1 click smaller, and I keep doing that all the way down to 0. And I ended up on the left, and I actually went 1 click tighter than 0, and then knitted to the right. Now I'm going to sew off these stitches. I want a long piece of yarn for sewing up. So that's what I'm going to do. It's about 1 yard of yarn. And then I want my double-eyed needle, not an ordinary needle. I like this for this job because it's long. So I thread this piece of yarn in my double-eyed needle, and then I put all my stitches, hold them against the needles, and bring all the needles fully out toward me. That makes it much easier to sew off. And I'm also getting down under the work, and at this point I'm finally taking the ribber comb off. I'd like a little weight on it though. So I'm also reaching down there, and I'm putting a couple of claw weights down on the ribbing. I like to keep them out of the loopy stuff. So A couple of claw weights will be plenty. Now I'm ready to begin sewing off. I just insert this needle into that loop and pop the loop onto the needle, and I use my right hand to control the stitches. If you're right-handed, you would pop them off with your right hand and use your left hand to keep the stitches from coming off the end of the needles. It's not very hard to do, because when these latches are closed, the end of the needle is bulbous and there's a little bit of pressure on the stitch, so it doesn't just fall off. It's not hard at all till you get the left hand in, and then you need to slow down and just be careful that you don't lose any stitches. And you can stack a lot of stitches on your tool. After you have all the stitches you think you can stand on your tool, just draw them through, and then you can sew some more off onto your tool and move farther toward the left-hand side of the work. Now, some right-hand people might like to finish up on the left-hand side of the work so they can work to the right, but I think most of us are used to finishing up on the right-hand side. That's just kind of something the manuals had us do. So I'll get this sewn off and be right back. Let's look at what we have and talk about how to finish it up. So here's my hat, and I'm drawing up the thing that I just sewed off. That would be the crown of the hat up there. Drawing that off and taking it off the double-eyed tool. So here's my hat. It's going to be folded here. Now I know it looks big, but that's because this is that big loopy stitch. This is the outside of the work. The inside of the work, the knit side, is not very interesting at all. You're going to tighten the string at the top. I like to sew around it again, and then do a stitch, a mattress stitch, and sew this seam from the top down the side. Just match the stripes and take the mattress stitch there, and it won't look perfect. It's kind of hard to keep from having a little bit of a lump showing. Let me show you on the green. You see, you can tell where my seam was, but it's not very noticeable, and I just put that down the back of my head. I should mention this is not a good hat for a ponytail hat. Leaving the top open isn't going to work really well for a bun or ponytail to stick out, because I've made this hat long. This is a slouchy hat, and it hangs down the back of your head a ways. So I'll go ahead and close it. Do the mattress stitch from here to here. Then fold it so that, of course you've had it folded while you were mattress stitching. Fold it so that the ribbing is this side up, and continue to mattress stitch down to the point here. Then you're going to fold these. It'll be a loop, and you're going to fold them to the inside and whip them right here to the top of the ribbing. That way the ribbing is doubled and it stays in place. After that, you want to make a pom-pom for the top of the hat, or maybe you'd like to attach a fur one. Now this was a pom-pom I made using the same yarn as the hat, and I used a large clover pom-pom maker. So you've got a couple options there. You could also use a fur ball for the top of the hat. Here's a fur ball. The fabric stores have these for sale. So that would give you another option. Here's the cream colored hat all finished up. I'm just really happy with it in this color. I think this will be a fun little gift hat. It's got all kinds of texture and warmth, and it's long and slouchy with a big, fat, fluffy pom-pom. If you enjoyed this content and found it useful, please be sure to subscribe and click on the notification bell. That helps me get YouTube's algorithm to give more machine knitting videos out to people in response to their searches. Thanks, folks.